1.
You'll hear a tutor and two students discussing modern European writers. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Okay, so to continue our look at modern European writers who have focused on the future in their work, today we're talking about H.G. Wells. Last week, I asked you both to do some background research on Wells, which we're going to discuss now. Gitanjali, tell us about H.G. Wells.
Right. So, H.G. Wells was a hugely successful British science fiction writer, writing at the end of the 19th and the start of the 20th century, and much of his work focused on predicting the future.
Jason, do you think Wells was just using the future as a narrative device in his fiction?
No. He really believed we can predict the future. In fact, he gave a speech at the Royal Institution in London in 1902 called The Discovery of the Future. And the point he was making was that by looking at what you know about the present and about science, it's quite possible to predict the future.
Indeed. Gitanjali, do you think Wells was always optimistic in his predictions?
Not at all. In fact, he varied in his predictions from being extremely pessimistic about the future to being optimistic. Interestingly, one theory I read links the attitude in Wells's work to his own health. When he was writing The Time Machine, which was published in 1895, he'd just been diagnosed with an incurable fatal disease. Not surprisingly, the book is very pessimistic, being about a dystopia in the future, a long time in the future, the year 802-701 in fact, where there are two races on Earth, the Morlocks and the Eloi, and the Morlocks actually eat the Eloi.
I thought it was interesting, though, that it was H.G. Wells who actually came up with the phrase time machine, so despite being pessimistic, the work has had a lasting effect on our culture.
Right. After The Time Machine, though, H.G. Wells didn't die, of course, and his recovery might be why he began to be a bit more optimistic about the future.
So that brings us to his first utopia, Anticipations. Jason, tell us about that.
Well, Anticipations, or to give it its full title, Anticipations of the Reaction of the Mechanical and Scientific Progress upon Human Life and Scientific Thought, was published in 1901 and was set in the New Republic of the year 2000. Some of the things Wells predicts are fairly close to our reality today, including 24-hour news, global telecommunications, and even a European Union.
We'll come back to the accuracy of Wells's predictions a little later. Gitanjali, how was Wells's work received at the time?
Well, although Wells was extremely successful, not everyone respected his work or his predictions. Another well-known science fiction writer, Jules Verne, viciously attacked him for works such as The First Man in the Moon, which Verne argued weren't rooted in scientific fact at all.
That's right. Now, Wells wrote a number of other utopian visions of the future. Jason?
Yes. In A Modern Utopia, published in 1905, his vision was of a world where there's no private property, where everyone has access to wonderful healthcare, and interestingly, where everyone's personal information is stored on cards in a central database outside Paris. Apart from the healthcare, I'm not sure everyone today would see that as a positive view of the future.
Neither am I. And, on a similar note, Wells strongly believed in population control and, in The Shape of Things to Come, which was published in 1933, he sees and supports a world where the population is kept at 2 billion. Once again, I'm not sure most people today would necessarily see that as a good thing.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Gitanjali, in your research, did you come across anything about the world brain?
Yes, I did. It's actually very interesting. Throughout the 1930s, Wells predicted and supported the setting up of a huge world encyclopedia. And towards the end of the decade, in 1938, he wrote a series of essays called World Brain. In these essays, he called for the world to make use of modern technology to create an enormous global encyclopedia so that all our knowledge is available to all people, not just an educated elite. Wells envisioned this as probably being on microfilm. He thought it would allow anyone, anywhere in the world, to look at any book or any document. He also thought it would be created by everyone, once again, not just by an elite.
Yes, and as you can imagine, many people today say that the internet has basically fulfilled his prediction. Of course, it doesn't use microfilm, but essentially, it does meet all Wells's main requirements.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2. Part 2.
You will hear a talk about safety in different regions.
First, look at questions 11 to 14. Listen carefully
and answer questions 11 to 14.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here to talk to you about staying safe on holiday. Before I came this evening, I did a little research on where students like to go for their holidays and came up with 2 different regions, Latin America and India. So, I've been looking at the crime figures for both areas, and I thought I'd start by talking a bit about that. Then I'll give you some advice about how to avoid becoming a victim of crime. Okay, first of all, let's look at what kinds of crime are committed most in different regions. Okay, I'll start with India. Generally, India isn't thought of as a dangerous place for individuals, but there has been an increase in handbag theft in recent years. So keep an eye on your bag when you're out in the street. Right. Now, let's look at Latin America. Of course, you do realise that not all Latin American countries are the same, but it is true to say that guns are used in a high percentage of crimes across the region. Looking at the figures, it seems that gun crime is a serious problem throughout.
Before the broadcast continues, look at questions 15 to 20. You will now listen to the second part of the talk.
And answer questions 15 to 20.
I can see some of you are thinking that it all sounds rather dangerous, but I know lots of people who've been there and had a really great time. They followed advice from the authorities, like making sure they didn't wear expensive jewellery in the street. And I'd certainly advise anyone travelling to Latin America to do the same. Another thing you should be careful of is not to go to lonely places at night. But of course, that's the same anywhere. But I must say, you do have to be very careful in some parts of Latin America when you take your money out of a cash machine. Sometimes you find that thieves stand very close to people at cash machines and take their money as it comes out. Okay, so now I'll finish by talking a little bit about India. I've actually been to India, and I didn't have any feeling that it was dangerous at all. First of all, I went on an organised tour with a group of people. This is definitely the best way to go because it's so much safer. I mean, I didn't go anywhere without the group, and we had a tour guide who spoke the local language and knew the area. In fact, I remember now, she warned us not to go off with strangers, even if they seem nice and friendly. But again, you wouldn't do that at home either, would you?
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3. Part 3.
You will hear a conversation about tea between an expert and a reporter. You have 30 seconds to look at questions 21 to 24.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Hi Jacob, thank you so much for coming along today.
It's my pleasure. I'm very intrigued about what a tea meditation entails exactly.
Well, it's very simple really. I think the first thing you need to keep in mind is that it is mostly about leaving everything that you have been thinking or worrying about today to one side. Really focus on the present moment.
Oh, it sounds great. I certainly don't know very much about tea and I'm keen to get started. But before you go into more detail, can I ask you what your favourite kind of tea is?
Well, I think the kind of tea we are going to have today is my favourite. It is pu'er tea from Yunnan province in southern China.
What makes this tea special?
Pu'er is a dark tea. The regions of Yunnan, the north of Vietnam and Laos, have one of the best climates for growing tea in the world. Pu'er is a post-fermented tea.
Oh, what is a post-fermented tea exactly?
It is a tea that has undergone a period of aging in the open air. They age the tea for days, even years. The exposure to humidity and oxygen help to oxidize the tea leaves and encourage fermentation. This changes the smell of the tea and also removes a lot of bitterness from the taste.
It sounds similar to the process of aging wine.
The process is different, but the effect of aging on the taste is certainly similar.
Does this mean the tea can be quite expensive?
Absolutely. It can be very expensive. The tea is usually pressed into balls or cakes and sold. At one time, only tea enthusiasts cared about buying these cakes, but now many people have realized that they are an investment, and so buy them like they would buy gold, because the price goes up a lot over time.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
So now I want you to focus on clearing your mind of anything other than this present moment. Let go of any concerns.
Okay, one slight problem. I will need to record our conversation, and I will need to take notes for the article. I plan to write about this for my newspaper. Is that okay?
Oh yes, of course. Whatever you need.
Thank you. I'll try to keep my notes to a minimum.
Good. So, where was I? Oh yes, I think very few people really appreciate the complexity and variety of tea that exists in the world.
Right. Most people are maybe like me and just use tea bags.
Exactly. And with a tea bag, the tea is trapped inside and cannot move around freely. You can really taste the difference drinking a brewed tea that was free to move around through all the water.
So, do you ever use tea bags?
Never. There are many different kinds of tea. White, yellow, black, green, oolong, matcha, herbal and many others. Each one has its own unique properties. To fully experience what each tea has to offer, you must brew it in the correct way. I also believe in only drinking tea that is picked and sorted by hand, rather than using mechanical processes. Although it takes more time, the tea made by hand is so much better that it leads to an increase in the tea's sales.
But in that case, surely if there is more interest in the tea, and with the time-intensive farming process, this means there could be shortages because the demand is higher than the ability to produce it.
There were shortages for a while, but then an artificial fermentation process was developed in the 1970s, which helped to speed up the fermentation times. As I mentioned, this process has an aging effect on the taste of pu'er tea that is very similar to the effect on the taste of wine that you get from that fermentation process, though for pu'er tea today, we're talking about that artificial process.
How can they do this artificially?
The farmers gather the tea leaves into a big pile, then cover it with a large sheet or tarp. They spray water on the tea every now and then, and therefore fermentation happens faster. Usually, the tea is left for 30, 45, 60 or even 90 days still. The farmer will check the tea every few days, and just by the feel of the tea, he knows whether it is ready or if it needs more time.
Wow, that sounds like a fascinating process. I never realised that there was such a science behind producing tea.
Well, now you are ready for the best part, the tasting of it.
That sounds like a very good idea to me.
So what I will do now is boil the water, and we can begin our meditation.
What does that entail?
We need to focus on only two things. The first is your mind and body. Forget everything that you have been worrying about today. Forget about what you have to do later on, or what somebody said to you earlier. Focus on your breathing and on how your body feels. If you have aches and pains, acknowledge them. Pinpoint where there is tension in your body and try to release it.
Oh, yes, I can really feel tension in my shoulders.
Let it go. Close your eyes if that helps. Take deep breaths in and out. Soon we will drink the tea. When you drink it, think about the taste and how it feels on your tongue. Is it easy to swallow the tea, or do you need to gulp it?
Can you brew the tea leaves more than once?
Oh yes, you can brew some teas more than 10 times. Now we will shift to noble silence, focusing only on ourselves and the tea. Enjoy.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Part 4.
You will hear a talk from a series of lectures on the survival of our planet. Professor Samson talks about endangered species of flora and fauna. First, you'll have half a minute to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully to the talk and answer questions 31 to 40.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today's topic in this series of lectures on our planet is about ensuring the survival of our very important plant and animal species. In this lecture, I want to discuss one way that we can do this. No one will ever see a huge dinosaur thundering through the forest. No one will ever see a paradise parrot flash its rainbow colours across the sky. The fact is that many animals and plants have been wiped out. Sadly, they are extinct. It is too late for them. Extinction is forever. We can't do anything about the species that have already disappeared. But today, there are many animals and plants that could still become extinct in the future if we do not act now. They are endangered. The African elephant and rhinoceros have become endangered because of the value of their tusks. Australian parrots and reptiles are smuggled onto planes because certain people in other countries are prepared to pay thousands of dollars for them. And there are many other species around the world that are endangered because they no longer have a place in which to live and reproduce safely. The main cause of extinction is the destruction of habitats. A habitat contains all that a living thing needs to survive: space, light, water, food, shelter, and opportunities for reproduction. The population of the world is growing rapidly, and this is placing great demands on land and resources for housing and for growing food. When vegetation is cleared and swamps are drained for agriculture, mining and suburbs, or when rivers are dammed to store water, plants are destroyed and animal life is threatened. In other words, humans are changing and destroying the habitats of animals and plants, which is in turn reducing their chances of survival. So how can we conserve habitats and help save endangered species? Well, one way is to protect their habitats permanently in national parks or nature reserves. National parks have been created in many countries. They encourage people to enjoy the beauty and diversity of the animals and plants that live there without harming them. By supporting and visiting these parks, people can become more aware of the species that live there and how the parks work to protect them. It is very important that, when visiting a national park, we keep them safe for future generations of plants and animals by obeying a few rules. Firstly, follow the fire regulations. Don't throw cigarettes or build fires, except at certain times of the year in especially allocated areas and facilities. Secondly, remember to leave pets at home. Pets, such as cats or dogs, can hunt birds or other small animals. Some pets might even escape and become a serious threat. Thirdly, place all rubbish in a bin or take it home. Plastic bags or leftover food are dangerous to the animals and harm the environment. Don't pick the flowers or damage the plants. Flowers create the next generation of the plant. Also, for the same reason, birds' eggs must be left in their nests. The loss of species in the past is sad. However, there is hope for the future. Despite the demands of our increasing population, we can work to protect the plant and animal species we still have. So I would like to conclude by saying that I believe that, with strong public awareness and support of these national parks and reserves, the future of endangered species can be ensured.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Give it to me.